You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. And I still have my head cold and my allergies, which means that I'm saying some of my M's as B's, as in perfectly marvelous. But we shall somehow persevere. That's a P as a B. Well, anyway, we have some fascinating statistics for you coming up. And Fighting Words at the end of the program has its own take on the vice presidential debate. And in between, we have a juicy conversation with Letty Cottin Pogrebin, an old friend and former Ms. Magazine editorial colleague, about her recent book, Shanda, a memoir of shame and secrecy. Believe me, it tells a lot of truths. So let's get to those statistics, which means, going inside the headlines. The women's movement has been doing its work, and it's showing up in the statistics now. Axios, to whom I'm indebted for these statistics, has run a couple of stories that are very revealing. So, data of all kinds reveals a little discussed future-defining trend. Men and women are going separate ways. The split is clear in politics, religion, education, labor market. For the next generation, gender is becoming the biggest predictor of how you think, act, and vote. There's a much broader story here, says Daniel Cox in Axios, director of the Survey Center on American Life. Even after all the votes, he says, are tallied and we've moved on from the 2024 election, we are not going to have resolved any of the cultural and relational tension between young men and young women. Well, I would add that given what that tension has been in the past, it can only be an improvement. You see it in politics, continues Axios. Women are turning left and men are turning right. You see it in religion, which we'll go into in a moment. For the first time ever recorded in the U.S., young men are more religious than young women. You see it in education. There are 2.4 million more women on U.S. college campuses than men. The American Institute for Boys and Men, I didn't know there was such a thing, AIBM, notes. And those degrees are often resulting in higher wage jobs for women in big cities, a Pew Research Center analysis of census data found. You see it in the labor market. Wages and labor force participation have increased since the 1980s for college-educated young men and women and for working-class women. But they've stagnated for working-class men, who are also now significantly less likely to be employed compared to 4 decades ago, according to AIBM's analysis. That's the American Institute for Boys and Men. You see it in visions for the future. Men are more likely than women to want marriage and kids, according to Pew Research. The percentage of 18 to 34-year-old women wanting kids has fallen to 45% versus 57% for men. The polarization is even stronger among adults under 25. Social media content and algorithms may be one reason, because men are constantly fed social media content that is negative toward women and vice versa. Videos breaking down bad dates from the perspective of either the man or the woman are a viral example of that trend. Gen Zers are 15 points more likely than other generations to say that social media has negatively impacted their outlook on men, and 10 points more likely to say so for women. That's a Morning Consult poll. Now, keep in mind that the tone of these statistical articles is generally negative, and I'm not so sure that's deserved. I think some of these changes, maybe most, have been a long time coming and are much, much to be desired. Let's drill down and look at the religious divide among young Americans. Gen Z women of almost all faiths are more likely to be, quote, religiously unaffiliated than Gen Z men, an Axios review of polling data found. And it matters because while the overall trend of each generation being less observant than their elders is decades old, what's new is the gender split. The exodus of young women can be seen in particular in white evangelical congregations, which are becoming smaller and more male. The faith divide also reflects a political divide. Polls show young women moving left much faster again than young men. A survey by the Nonpartisan Public Religion Research Institute, PRRI, found that 39% of Gen Z women identify as religiously unaffiliated, compared with 31% of Gen Z men. Only 8% of Gen Z women identify as white evangelicals, compared with 13% of Gen Z men. This turns everything on its head. Just 6% of Gen Z women say that they're black Protestants, compared with 8% of Gen Z men. A surprising statistic given how black women across generations have been the drivers and the makers and shakers of the black church. The proportions of young people identifying as Catholic, Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, that's Mormon, or Muslim are also declining, but by similar rates for men and women. Gen Z, which includes those born between 1997 and 2012, is the most racially and ethnically diverse generation in U.S. history. And I would add, and there you may have one central clue as to the whys of all this. An estimated 40.8 million Gen Zers will be eligible to vote in the November general election. 1/6 of all qualified voters. Various statistics and studies show them to be the most left-leaning generation that will be taking part. Gen Z also appears to be more politically engaged than previous rising generations, and that's particularly true for Gen Z women. PRRI CEO Melissa Deckman told Axios. Democrats are more religiously diverse, while Republicans are more white and Christian, the PRRI survey found. Big surprise. The falling participation rates of young women in white evangelical churches is a warning sign for the GOP, says Deckman, she's also the author of a recent book, The Politics of Gen Z. And one of the biggest factors of Gen Z women leaving is the treatment of LGBTQ, etc. Individuals. But even more so, it's Gen Z women. Gen Z women who grew up in the Me Too era also are discouraged by sex abuse scandals in the evangelical and Catholic churches and the lack of leadership roles for women, Deckman says. Some experts think churches need to change their structures or even theology to retain more women or else face extinction. Duh, says Robin. For the whole lifetime of Gen Z, the dominant form of Christianity has been the era of conservative evangelical dominance, says the editor-in-chief of the Baptist journal Words and Way to Axios. Gen Z women identify Christianity with evangelicism, most denominations of which are politically conservative and don't allow women to become pastors or church leaders. Gen Z women are not putting up with that. We have to take a short break here, but I will return directly with our guest for the conversation, Letty Cottin Pogrebin. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMClive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Letty Cottin Pogrebin is an author, activist, and national public speaker. A founding editor of Ms. magazine, she has also published 12 books, 2 novels and 10 of nonfiction, and most recently, Shanda, a memoir of shame and secrecy, which she's with us today to discuss. She was consulting editor on Free to Be You and Me, has published in the New York Times, The Washington Post, Time Magazine, The Huffington Post, and The Nation, among other publications. A leader in many social justice causes, she served 2 terms as president of the Authors Guild and 2 terms as chair of the Board of Americans for Peace Now, an advocacy organization to promote a negotiated solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. She was a co-founder of the National Women's Political Caucus, the Ms. Foundation for Women, the UJA Federation Task Force on Women, and the International Center for Peace in the Middle East. Her many honors include an Emmy for Free to Be You and Me. Here is Letty Cottin Pogrebin. Letty, welcome to Women's Media Center Live. Welcome. It's good to have you here.
Wow. It's so wonderful to be with you, Robin. I miss sitting across a room, desk, cheek to jowl, reading manuscripts. It was such a wonderful period in my life.
That's what we did at Ms. for many, many years. Yeah, we shared an office. You were my roommate, and privy to many secrets and not so secrets. But you have now written. Well, it came out a little while ago, but I didn't get to it until recently. But it is some blockbuster. You have written a book called Shanda, 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 a memoir of shame and secrecy. So Shanda, a memoir of shame and secrecy, is an extraordinary book. I frankly, I think that this is, and I've known you for many years, and I've known you through many authorships. I think this is the best book you've ever written, and I think by far the most courageous. I think it's an incredibly gutsy book and brave. And it, where do I begin? It's about family secrets, but it's about American Judaism and the secrets kept by families in general, by Jewish families, American Jewish families in particular, but in the wake of a world war that particularly targeted Jews. It goes very deep and very on. So I congratulate you. I really do.
Thank you so much.
Well, it couldn't have been easy to write, and you've written it in a very welcoming tone as well. It's not one of those heavy-handed, plod through it because it's good for you books. It's not. It's highly entertaining. It's very funny in parts because it's also a memoir. So I mean, all the stories about your eating disorders as a child and as a young adult, are very funny in a way, and so much else is almost ridiculous in its humor, but then it's countered because their lies, families' lies, are so staggering.
They're creative. They're really creative.
Oh yeah.
But in today's world, they look so absurd because, I mean, for instance, the lengths to which families went to hide the fact that, the proverbial bachelor uncle was actually gay. Of course, gay didn't exist as a word there, except, if you were going to a ball, you were feeling gay about it.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. But, I mean, the number of families I knew who had uncles well into their 40s, 50s, and 60s who had never married in a
Of
culture in
course.
which marriage and child rearing was, as sacrosanct as going to synagogue Friday nights and Saturday mornings, they were covered for with lots of stories. He's artistic, or his job requires him to travel too much,
That's right.
or he was sick and he wouldn't be able to provide. I mean, there were cover-ups, there were papering overs, and it was all just to continue this absolutely dedicated effort to make yourself fit in, to make yourself look better, more perfect, more flawless than you were, because the Shanda, the capacity to be suddenly targeted for shame, that's what Shanda means, was as powerful as in today's world as being canceled,
Right.
and doxxed and ousted and labeled. It had that kind of power. So readers today can just extrapolate from the Shanda to the cancellation policy in the
Absolutely.
culture and understand what happened.
And you wouldn't think that cancellation would be that powerful today, because people are so open, appallingly, I think so, about everything, from what they had for lunch to the price of their new boots, online. Everything is sort of laid out there. And so you'd think, well, what the hell is there to keep secret? But there's a lot that they keep secret.
That's what I discovered. I mean, at first this book was going to be a survey of cross-cultural attitudes towards secrecy and shame.
Uh-huh.
And
I'm glad you didn't.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't too. I would be still writing it. I would probably be in an institution trying to
Yeah, you would.
trying to recover from my cerebral wound. But it was my editor's feeling, and I certainly immediately subscribed to it, that what I had in my own family was more than enough for 2 books.
Oh, God.
So I had to pare it down. I actually had to pare down. And my own family became not only kind of emblematic of the dynamics of secrecy and shame in Jewish families, but in families from all identity groups, and certainly immigrant families, because they're the ones who, even if they're very proud of their culture, they really want to be able to call themselves real Americans. And they figure out how much of real Americanism they want to embrace, and then they have to aspire, and then they have to achieve, and then they have to check themselves out against quote real Americans, and it's an unending undertaking.
Yep. Yeah, you write in a very moving introduction. Once I'd done some research into their lives, this is your family, was an abiding, sometimes goading, sometimes galvanizing fear of shame. Besides figuring out how to thrive in the new world, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins learned through bitter experience that nothing could overcome the ruinous impact of public disgrace. Their need to avoid scandal was that compelling. And it's true. I mean, so you had a kind of mania developed around secrecy and shame, which had been set on fire in 1951 by the discovery that your parents had concealed from you the truth about their personal histories, and that every member of your large extended family on both sides, God, was in on it. And that years later, as tongues loosened, I learned that the original dissemblers in our family were none other than my maternal grandparents, who until they died when they came to America, hid a seismic event that occurred in 1898 before they even came to America. So, I mean, that kind of does color your. And you didn't you learn that you were a year younger or a year older than you thought you were?
I made myself a year older when I went out to get Social Security.
I see.
Numbers. I had to make myself a year older because I had learned that certain lies were lies of survival, and I had to support myself. So I had to be 16.
Exactly.
So I happened to only be 15.
Yeah.
And in those years without the internet, you
Of
didn't
course.
worry
Yeah.
about getting caught.
Well, they
And
made
the,
my
the
mother made me a year younger because I was
yeah.
a kid actor, and because apparently having your own radio show, for God's sake,
Mhm.
at age 4, at age 4 was not young enough. Wait for it, not young enough. So she had to have me age 3. So, so I got all the way to 18 when I finally met my supposedly dead father. Um, Big surprise. I'd just been sleuthing, looking for him through phone books for 8 years. Then I learned that I was a year older than I thought I was. This is very disconcerting news, as you know.
Well, it's all very unmooring if you think you're kind of rooted in the universe, and then suddenly this tentacle gets ripped out of
That's right.
the ground. That tentacle, you start to tip a little. And I know your life because I've told you this before, but you were literally my idol. I did not miss a moment of I Remember Mama
Letty.
all through my childhood and teen years. I think I might have been a little too young to listen to your radio show, although I think I'm a year older than you, but I don't remember the radio show. I just remember everything
Mama.
about I Remember Mama, and
Well,
I remember
they were
character.
they were an immigrant family, you see, so
Yeah,
it worked perfectly. Yeah,
exactly. It
yeah.
made me feel known and seen, and you were so adorable. My
Oh,
God,
my God.
I tried to get clothes that looked like yours, so that
Oh,
when I
Letty.
met you in feminism, it was like meeting Marilyn Monroe for
Oh, how
some young
hilarious.
teenage boy.
Oh, my God, my God.
Yeah.
But you point out very cogently and very movingly. You're not afraid of emotion in this book, which is why I'm very good. Let me lodge my late vote on this. I'm very glad it's not just a survey. But this
Mm,
is a moving book, and this lets you inside their hearts and minds and sins.
right.
Yeah,
I've
it's
I've
and it's
developed a
also
lot of
not just Jewish
compassion.
families. It's
No,
also
no,
you spend a lot of
no.
time going around the
Yeah,
world and looking at different immigrant families and different families. This is a family sickness or whatever,
yes,
you know?
y- yes, I think so. Yeah, and I mean, I have had conversations with my African American friends and Palestinian American friends in particular because I have very intimate friendships in those
Right.
groups of people, and they can't believe the overlaps. I wrote about some of them. I wrote about some African American woman who wrote in her own book about putting a blonde wig on, which she made
Right.
out of a towel, just to pretend that she was, quote, a real American. And a real American for her was a white woman with blonde hair.
Yep.
And we talked, and I was in a Black Jewish discussion dialogue group for 10 years. Every once a month for 10 years, we met in each other's homes and we divulged each other's secrets and sufferings and self denials and self abnegations.
Mm.
And I mean, we had one session about hair, and I had admitted that I hated having straight hair. Of course, you hate what you don't have.
Sure.
I wanted curly hair. I used to sleep in bobby pins, and I used to put beer can before there were rollers. I used to put roll my hair in beer cans, and I wanted dimples, and I used to put buttons in my cheek and hold them in with Scotch tape so I could have um, um, little dents in my cheek, and so I was
Oh.
envious of anyone who had the things I didn't have. And in one session of my Black Jewish group, I said, I always love to feel my Black friends' hair, and they said, "Oh, fuck that,"
Sure.
I don't know if I can curse on this program.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but they say that's what little girls always wanted to touch my hair. I hate it. And that was such a revelation to me that for me it was to admire this fluffy, curly,
Yeah.
almost angel halo hair, and them not to realize that my wanting to touch it was not ridicule, but was envy. And so we put stuff on the table that made me understand that secrets, changing yourself, molding yourself, masquerades, all of that. We had our own. We had our different masks, but we masked.
Yeah.
And then on the whole issue of the voice.
Oh, yeah.
Code switching for blacks.
That's right.
And others, and for me being very careful that I never sounded like my Yiddish uncles, aunts, and grandparents.
Huh. Oh, wow. Well, see, that's so interesting because I didn't have that problem because my mother was very, very, with a capital A, apostate. But she still observed a high holiday now and then, and you couldn't completely parse out where she was on anything because she also celebrated every holiday she could. Diwali, Festival of Lights, whatever it was, she was celebrating it. And so therefore, it came to mean nothing, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
But yours was much more deep, much serious. Well, not knowing whether your father's alive or not, thinking he was being told he died in the war was pretty serious.
Yeah,
but
why was that put over on you? Why? Why did she need you to think that?
Because she didn't want me in touch with him because she was saying that he didn't marry her. I mean, in other words, he came as a refugee, and she put him up, and she did all these things for him as a doctor.
If he showed up, he might have parental rights, and then she would have to marry him.
No, he didn't care. He didn't give a damn about parental rights. But no. In fact, it turned out years later, I learned he was betrothed to a woman back in Austria. But he didn't want to marry her, but he would have married her if he had to. And but my aunts were so fierce and protective of her at that point, and she herself was so closeted that it was not possible. But
would you have been called an illegitimate child at that time?
Yeah, I suppose.
So she was hiding that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, I mean,
which is so amazing because, as you referenced, my grandmother being the original sin in the category of secrecy. My grandmother was a runaway bride in the late 1800s. Because if you've seen Fiddler, you know the scenario. My grandmother was betrothed to an older man. If you saw Fiddler, you know that's Laser Wolf the Butcher.
Yep.
And he was something like 20 years older. And my grandmother, couldn't disobey. Girls had no power, no agency in those years.
Nothing.
So she and they lived in a little shtetl in Hungary called Pilipitz. And so my grandmother went through with the marriage, but then she went off with this Laser Wolf type husband. I don't know if she was something like 16 or 17 at the time, and he in his 40s. And when he went into whatever the bathroom was, or whether it was an outhouse or an actual bathroom, to change for the conjugal act, my grandmother got very busy tying together the sheets and the pillowcases and made a thing to shimmy down from out of the window and ran away.
I know, it's fantastic.
Can you imagine? I mean, this is a little woman little girl who had absolutely not in touch with the world, no sense of her own power.
And we're talking what year approximately? What year?
I believe that was 1899, I believe.
God.
Since my mother was the first child and was born in 1901.
But
it took some time.
This goes on generations after generations because you had two half-sisters by your parents' other marriages, which you didn't know had taken place. Which you said did not make one whole sister. I mean, and I have two half brothers by my father having married finally the woman he had been betrothed to back in Austria. But I'm not in touch with them anymore. I was in touch with one of them for 10 years. But he didn't want to know who I was now.
Well, my story, as you know, because you just read it very carefully, thank you so much, is so similar.
Yeah.
I found, in quotes, she found me actually, my father's daughter, who I did not know existed until, as you said, 1951, when I was at a cousin's bar mitzvah, and an older cousin of mine with whom I was playing gin rummy got very pissed off when I beat her, and I got, I think, 37 points off her. She threw the bridge table over and threw the cards at me and said, "You think you're so great? Your sister isn't even your real sister, and your parents married before they were married before." And she was flailing her arms and yelling at me, and I was blacking out, and I simply blacked out.
Wow.
So I woke up on the floor, and my parents were kneeling on either side of me. My mother had a wet washcloth. I'll never forget it, because I think of it every time I use a wet washcloth. She was mopping my forehead like crazy. "We should have told you. We should have told you. I'm sorry we didn't tell you."
Yeah, they should have.
I went into shock. I could not take in those facts. So I ended up knowing that I had another sister. The sister I thought was my sister, Betty, was 14 years older than I. Parenthesis. Many people had asked my mother, when intrusive neighbors and gossips and so on, how come there's 14 years between Betty and Letty?
What do you
and
know?
My mother would make a very sad face and say, "Well, Jack and I had a lot of trouble conceiving, but then God gave us Bunny," because that was my baby name. But God gave us Bunny. And so that was the end of me questioning why am I 14 years younger than my sister? Well, the answer is there was a marriage.
Yeah.
There was a marriage, and there was a period of time when neither of them were married. They each had been married before in the 1920s. They met each other in 1937. I was born in 1939, and they immediately lied and said they'd been married in 1923, because then my father could cover for being my sister's father, because my sister was born in 1925. And that's how we became a completely bogus Potemkin village.
I was going to say a blended family with no blending. Yeah.
With a false front.
It is amazing.
Then Rena, my father's daughter, who had, disappeared, and there was no internet, no AI, and
no, of course.
I mean, there were barely telephone books when I was a child, so you weren't going to look up a long-lost sister who God knows where she went.
Yeah.
But she turned up on my doorstep when my mother was actually dying of cancer. In 1954, I was going into my senior year in high school, and she was on the doorstep, and she had this long braid. No women had a long braid. I mean, that was like Gretchen from Hamburg type braid, And everybody was looking like Mamie Eisenhower, so she was quite striking. She had thick glasses. She was wearing she was like a mix of cultures. She was wearing like a Scottish plaid skirt and brown and white shoes. And she turned out to be that sister, my sister through my father. And she turned out to be the world's leading authority on gypsy culture. She had a PhD in anthropology.
God.
And she was a professor at Hunter College.
Wow.
So we were living in Queens, and she was living, teaching at Hunter in Manhattan, and living in another part of Queens. And I never knew she existed until she turned up. And she turned up because she was running away from her mother, who was an abusive mother, who once hung her out the window because she had disobeyed, and the mother held her out as a little child.
Hung her out the window. Oh my God!
I know.
Oh my God! Now with families,
all of a sudden, in my early teens, my placid, peaceful, ordinary, good housekeeping, ladies' home journal, perfect family childhood exploded and shattered, and the lies all came tumbling out in the form of shards.
God,
and how I ever trusted anyone after that it was my journey to have to piece that all together.
Yeah.
Which is really why to make a huge leap. But you knew my husband, so I'll say it. Which is why I married a man who was so quintessentially decent and trustworthy and never lied and lived his life open and just as the most dear and loyal human being I have ever met. And that was my repair.
There's one more thing. I mean, there's so much in this book I want to go into, but we only have time for so much. And there's one thing I definitely want to raise, which is the Mouse That Roared chapter, where now, okay, now you're talking. Let me just read the opening lines of this because that explains it best. And it's so well written. Okay, my speaking voice has embarrassed me since puberty. It's one thing to talk like Minnie Mouse when you're 4 or 5, something else entirely when you're 30, 50, or 70. To this day, upon hearing my chirpy hello on the phone, callers who don't know me say, "May I speak to your mommy?" And then you go into it and how you've tried very many different things to lower the timbre and to change it and even once you went and you did commercials because people were told you, hey, you could earn a lot of money being I don't know what, an elf or something with this voice. With this
Tova Felcher, who does earn a lot of money as an actor, was sitting in front of me at my synagogue and listening to me pray in this Minnie Mouse voice. And instead of saying, "Will you shut up?" she said, "You should see my agent."
Well, it was very sweet of her, but that unfortunately did not work out. But I remember back in our Ms. editorship days, our shared office, where one of the things we all used to make you do because it was so hilarious and wonderful, but mostly hilarious, was the Amelia Earhart song. Do you remember the music?
Yes, of course.
Which you would do in this high-pitched little voice, and we would roll on the floor with tears running down our face. And I now,
because Bert, my husband Bert, was a red diaper baby, and for some reason or other, along with the banks are made of marble, and which side are you on, and buddy, can you spare a dime? He also learned Amelia Earhart about the downed female aviator who then became one of my early heroes as a child. So I learned it as soon as Bert taught it to me. I learned it, and I sang it to the editorial staff to make a day cheery and bright.
Yeah, no,
of course, she ends up in the drink, but.
Yeah,
nonetheless, we all like the
well,
song.
It was the combination of the pitch of your voice and the song that was so funny, and your way of delivering it. But I realized something after reading this book, which is that I collaborated in that hilarity, and I can't very well take it back now because it's 100 years old. But I think it was cruel. I mean, it wasn't intentionally so. It was all together.
No, I know.
But
I took it as a loving.
I knew you did.
Kind of ridicule.
I knew you did, but but the voice, it's something apparently that you cannot help. You've tried lowering the timbre.
Well, I've tried. I've been to voices coaches. I want your voice, Robin.
Oh well.
You come on the stage and you have this stentorian voice, and it's full of warmth, but also full of authority. And I'm coming out there to talk about the Israel-Gaza war in the voice of a Teletubby. So, you just have to imagine.
The voice of a Teletubby. No.
That it takes a while for my audience to even acknowledge that I might know what I'm talking about.
Oh, well, you certainly know what you're talking about.
It sounds absurd, but I use that, as I know you know, in that chapter to talk about the meaning of voice and the way we give voice to and candidates promise to be the voice of the unheard. And voice is so important. Voice is part of presentation, and sometimes it precedes body language. It precedes intellect, and therefore when I and other women like me come through with these little voices and want to be taken seriously, we're starting five steps back.
I know.
We have to work a lot harder. And it's much the same as somebody who maybe has a lisp or a stutter, or somebody who has an accent, or somebody who is clear, or somebody who has an impediment. and therefore I wanted to put it in the book because shaming those people, and I didn't feel shamed in at the Ms. meetings when people laughed. I really didn't. In fact, I was so delighted if anyone, thought anything nice about me, because sometimes I felt I had certain opinions that were not always in sync with my sister editors. But I mean, those were some of the best years of my life, so I don't have any complaints about it in the end. I mean, I'm just becoming a rabid truth teller.
Well, I think being a rabid truth teller is an excellent thing. I don't know, you say at a certain point that you wish for people to have a life in which they have secrets but no shame, and I understand that.
Right.
But I think that for me, privacy replaces secrecy, because secrecy still hides many other things that are not necessary.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas privacy sounds like a self-empowerment in some ways. But I don't know.
And there's it's a very, very urgent distinction. First of all, if you are holding other people's secrets, you may never divulge them without permission.
That's true.
In fact, that's it. That's your obligation and undertaking. When you become the listener, you become the guard until the key is given to you to release. But when I was writing this book, and I was writing about my aunts and uncles and grandparents and cousins, I called, and as I said, I have a huge family. I have an old-style family where my parents were each one of 7, and where there were 12 cousins on each side. So we had a lot of hubbub and a lot of characters and a lot of stories. Is a gift to a writer. But I did call the ones who were still alive. And I said, I'm going to tell this story, about Uncle Herbie, and I'm going to tell about how Uncle Louie went on the radio and shamed the whole family by outing the argument between him and our grandpa, which made the whole family look like he was stealing the patrimony. And I would say that, and they would say back to me, "Go for it." And did you hear this story? Or do you remember?
Oh my God, they'd add to it.
They'd add to it. So there is a moment, I think, in one's older years where you look back and you see the absurdity of what was hidden, and the damage it done you to feel that it had to be hidden for some reason, that in some way it delegitimated you, or it made you small, or it made you improper in one way or another.
And it was blaming the victim. Totally blaming the victim. The same thing in another way that I did with your voice. I mean, it's blaming the person for being in the situation in which you have helped put them.
Yeah, exactly.
What do we do about this? Because in the future, I'm not talking about your family in particular, although your family is part of it, as is mine, but how do we change this, or will it change organically? I don't think so.
Because so many Jews here have this absolute insane need to be accepted. Because we're 2% of the American population, 0.2% of the world population, and it's scary. We want to fit in.
No,
and
clearly.
About the whole issue of secrecy and when it's privacy and when it's hiding and when it's pathological. Jews have survived on secrecy. If it was Anne Frank
you make that
attic,
point. You make that point,
or if it was hiding behind a different name, or if it was changing your religion during the Inquisition. If Jews didn't hide and change and be chameleons, we wouldn't survive.
It's not just obviously Jews, but clearly they were one major victim group.
Yeah.
And I think this is a very important book for anybody to read of whatever background, because
I get my letters, my reader letters are very dispository on that point. I mean, because I got a letter from a Catholic man, a Catholic male, gay man, who, I mean, this is not a category that is me in any form, but he said, I identified with so much in your book, and the biggest thing was on her deathbed, my mother confessed to me that I was the product of her affair with our priest.
Ah! Oh, Jesus.
So, and then
Ah.
he went on and on and on about discovering that he had a sister who had been tucked away in a mental institution. I don't know if in today's world she would simply have been sent to therapy.
Those tucked away siblings, I tell you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
right.
God.
So
Well,
letters like that persuaded me that the more, the old writer's advice, instruction is, write about what you know. Well, I wrote about what Grace Paley said I should write about. She said, write about what you don't know about what you know.
yeah.
And then writers are told, the more specific, the more general it becomes. And that part's true.
Yeah.
The more specific, the more universal. So a male gay Catholic, confessing the secrets of his life to me as if we were bonded by those experiences, I suddenly felt absolutely we are bonded by those experiences.
Yeah. Well,
and that's why I say that we should have a dupes anonymous.
Yeah.
Dupes like Alcoholics Anonymous.
That's true.
People who were duped mostly by their parents, but also
right.
by other relatives, into believing they are what they aren't. Their families were what they weren't. That things happened that didn't.
Well,
people
honey,
who are duped.
I congratulate you, and I think people really have to read the book because they can find out. It will set them ticking, and the ticking will go on until they find out things about their own families, and the more truth, the better. But it's because it's beautifully written, and it's, as I say, it's very, very gutsy. So thank you, Letty. Thank you for this book and for writing it and for surviving your family. All right, take care.
Thank you, Robin. Lots of love.
We have to take another short break here, but hang tight, because I will be back in just a few moments. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Eyes on the prize. Our fighting words. On October 1st, we were treated, or subjected, to the first, last, and probably only debate left in this presidential campaign. In this case, between the candidates for vice president, Democratic Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota versus Republican Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio. Did it, as they say, move the needle on the electoral result in November? No, it did not move the needle. But the vice presidential race rarely, if ever, does. It was John Adams, after all, who back in 1793 wrote to Abigail, his wife, "My country has in its wisdom contrived for me the most insignificant office ever the invention of man contrived, or his imagination conceived." Then again, this time might be different. Look at the ticket today. Besides, the nation is tending toward division, and our indentured servitude to the NRA makes the plethora of guns easily available to would-be assassins. Donald Trump has already been imperiled twice by such wannabes, and what's more, he's 78 years old, overweight, and in questionable health and fitness. That is, if the nation should even ever survive him. As for Kamala Harris, she faces the same ever-surfacing racist havoc Barack Obama did, compounded by the fact that, oh my God, she's actually a female human being. But that the race should matter doesn't necessarily mean that it will matter. That may be just as well, because Tim Walz clearly is more than a skin-deep nice guy. He's the real thing. We're leaving aside for the moment the reality that being decent went out with Joe Biden and should be, at a minimum, a given in any race for high office. And we're focusing instead on Tim Walz's temperament, which is decent, and then some. In fact, his being such an amenable human being was so evident that for a few seconds here and there in the debate it even inspired J.D. Vance to dabble in niceness. This must have given some people in the audience, I imagine, an unfortunate takeaway that Vance was actually doing anything but manipulate and lie. Vance lied about statistics. He lied about policy. He flat out lied about what he himself has repeatedly, publicly, and notoriously said, the infamous cat lady's remarks for one example, or that Haitian immigrants lawfully in the U.S. were eating people's pets for another. He declared his open enmity to experts. He slickly played the earnest and compassionate guy when dealing with women dying of abortion because of the Trump-engineered and then bragged about Supreme Court ruling. He lied about the Republican assault on democracy itself. He lied, folks. He lied. If I thought it would make much difference to the undecided, and yes, they do exist, watching this might have given me some concern that Walz's niceness, most of the time, well, much of it, permitted Vance's mendacity. He even agreed with Vance a few times that he himself tended to exaggerate, for instance. Such honesty, dear God. About which, by the way, here's a surprise. I found myself at certain moments longing for more, well, not blood sports, but fight back from Walz. And then I had to question myself as to whether the state of political discourse in our country has become so degraded that I've been desensitized to even the most superficial discussion on policy actually coming within a mile's distance of civility. I'm sure I couldn't have been alone on this. There were, however, at least 2 times when Tim Walz, in all his earnestness, showed his teeth on the subject of abortion and on the subject of democracy itself. Each time Vance was set back, either into repeated stammered denial or into silence. I couldn't help but think what a frightening creature Vance is. Young, good-looking, sounding polished and rational, able to move fairly seamlessly between virulent, racist, xenophobic, and wildly misogynistic positions and the pretense of gentlemanly demeanor, able to lie smilingly about his background and future intentions, and able to spin on the proverbial dime. So stuff that hungry Appalachian kid background. This man is a Yale Law School graduate and venture capitalist who is committed to women's reproductive bondage. That's not just weird, that's lethal. So we have to wait and see how this plays out, although I think the polls won't reflect changes at this point. Harrison and Walz have pulled even and are inching ahead in those teetering swing states. But there's no let-up in sight, and the tension won't release unless it were to be a wide, all-out victory for them in November, ideally along with the House and the Senate. Our job is to keep our eyes on the prize, not to be deterred by vicious attacks on one hand or terminal niceness on the other, or the vertigo we get from being in between, but to keep organizing, registering, getting out the vote, and fighting back in court, communities, campuses, and everywhere else for our country, where we know that freedom is not just another name for nothing left to lose. that's our show for this week. You can follow me on social media at The Robin Morgan. You can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net, and you can find my new novel, Parallax, and my just-out new book of poems, Harvesting Darkness, wherever books are sold. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Views expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer, as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer for this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us next time on Women's Media Center Live.